Hey, what's up? It's Comic95, the Savior. This is part 2 of my series in which I will talk to you about being mixed race in Japan. So for this video, I want to talk about those who are half Japanese and half black and or half white or any other type of mixture. So for starts, let's get this out of the way. As I already said in part 1, I will say it again here. No, for those of you that are curious, I am not half Japanese. I am not half Asian. I have some Asian in me and I have some white in me. I am technically mixed race, but I'm speaking on behalf of other people. I am not personally half Japanese, so let's get that out of the way. So, now that we've gotten that out of the way, and also I'm an American, in case you don't already know, I am an African American to be exact. So, as I was saying, I noticed that there's a lot of misinformation about what it's like being mixed race in Japan. So I want to talk about what I have personally observed from it, and I will not pretend to be an expert because once again, I'm not personally mixed, but this is what or at least not half Japanese, this is what I've personally observed from both teaching, working here, and befriending people who are. So first things first, what a lot of people don't really talk about is being mixed is actually valued in Japan. It's a rarity here, but it's not rare because it's an unwanted thing to be or do. But there are not enough foreigners here that are living, working, whatever in Japan long enough and that are actually in relationships that actually lead to, pregnancy, that, they give birth to their child, grows up, becomes an adult, etc. Most people here that are mixed race choose to get into the entertainment industry. They take advantage of their looks and become models, actors, etc. Singers and musicians even. And why is this so? Because Japanese media pretty much pressures their people to look foreign. Looking exotic is considered as very attractive here. So people want to have, larger features, whether it be their nose, their eyes, their mouth, their breasts, whatever. These are all things that are seen as qualities that foreigners tend to have, as well as being tall and model-like. For example, as I mentioned in my other video, I have personally been scouted by people to do modeling work, etc. Back when I lived in Tokyo, just because I looked mixed. In America, that would be a joke. I'm too short, too fat, pretty much total opposite, and I don't have the look of what you want for a legitimate model, which people seem to get that wrong too. Being cute is not what makes someone model worthy. Looking exotic and different and having that look is what makes someone worthy of being a model, which is why you oftentimes see girls that look a little bit strange and you're like, how did this girl become a model? Because they're not looking for the cute, whatever you want to call it, type girl, the sexy whatever. They want something that's different, which is why models are required to be tall to begin with, because it's an unusual trait. So, back on subject. Japan is basically the same way but more extreme. Because there's such a small percentage of people here who are biracial and or that are entirely, non-Asian at all, non-Japanese, there is a really huge market, and demand for foreigners, despite the fact there aren't really many of them to fill these voids and wants, etc. Now don't get me wrong, they do have some standards. You can't just be completely popped and come over here and make it. You have to be attractive by Japanese standards, with emphasis on by Japanese standards. And with that said and done, you would think that because so many people, worship the idea of being with a foreigner, they love white guys, they love black guys, they want to try out, being with this type of person, they dream of having mixed kids, they want to learn English, blah, blah, blah. You would think that people would love to be here as someone that's biracial. But I've kind of found it interesting that most people here that were born and raised in Japan, that grew up as a hafu, they cannot stand Japan. They hate it. And what I've come down to the conclusion is, the reason why they don't like it is they never get treated like a Japanese person despite being Japanese. You're always treated like an outsider, even although you want to join in on the fun and participate in calling other people outsiders, basically. So to explain that in more detail, I noticed that from my experience with befriending and working with people that are mixed, they like to downplay, their English ability. So like they can speak perfect English because they are mixed and one of their parents, normally the dad, speaks perfect English. They grew up in a native English speaking or native fluent speaker, home or whatever. So they already know English from either studying it or they learned it in their home country as their first language, etc. And they passed it on to their children. But while their children do know English and probably use their English ability to pass tests, etc., they don't like to brag about this. They want to try to pretend to be as Japanese as possible by downplaying the foreign side of them in order to fit into society. They don't see themselves as being half or foreigners. They see themselves as being Japanese, and it makes sense. Japan has pretty much built itself up on like this whole entire country or idea of Japanese being inside of this exclusive group together and foreigners all being on the outside. So if you are half Japanese, you don't look Japanese and you don't have an entirely Japanese family. So one of your parents were not born and raised in Japan. The way that people see you is, oh, you're a foreigner. Because upon first looking at you, you don't appear to really be Japanese. It's obvious that you're not 100% Japanese. So while you might actually stand out, whatnot, and get stares and whatnot, for the most part, most people experience being very popular in school unless you happen to be unattractive and you just so happen to also be mixed race, which there's a lot of that too. I know a lot of people obsess over the idea of people being half and mixed, etc., but being mixed does not make someone attractive. There are definitely a lot of people that are half Japanese, half whatever race, and same thing goes in America. There's a lot of people that are half black, half white, half Hispanic, half white, whatever. People think mixed kids are like this special whatever unicorn type baby, and it's like, I'm not gonna get into that. I'm not saying it because you're mixed, you're unattractive, but you get what I'm saying. People assume that because their child is mixed, that their kid is attractive. And what I'm getting at is, if you happen to be ugly and also happen to be mixed, you might feel like people are not liking you because you're mixed, when in actuality, you're ugly and you happen to be mixed, so it might seem like that's the reason why. I've said that that's pretty much the same thing that I've noticed with black people here too. I see a lot of black people here in Japan, and they feel like Japanese people are just racist, and that's the reason why they don't have dates and don't have a boyfriend, etc. When in actuality, it's like, well, you don't quite exactly look like the ideal whatever guy or girl that most Japanese people look for. I'm not Japanese, and I'm not going to talk for them on what's right and what's wrong and what their personal preferences are. I'm simply explaining that in my opinion, there's a lot of, I'm sorry, I got a message. There's a lot of misunderstandings with that. So, yeah, I've noticed that like my friends and whatnot, they'll try to pretend like, my friends and coworkers, they'll try to pretend like they don't know English. So they'll pretend like they don't know about foreign food, they don't know about foreign languages, they know very little about foreign countries, and they love being included inside of conversations that talk about foreigners as though they're like a separate race or whatever, which is true. I can't even fathom what that must be like. Because I think of like myself. Imagine if, I call myself an American and or African American. I cannot imagine growing up in America, and I grew up around pretty much all white people. I went to mostly white schools. I cannot imagine if while I was at school, my classmates pretty much talked to me as though I were not American. Now, while I did stand out and feel a little bit, alien-like, because everybody around me is pale skin, light colored eyes and hair, and here I am, total opposite of that. In the same sense, I was always viewed as an American. I can talk about immigrants in other countries without feeling like I'm an outsider, except for when we start talking about slavery. Then I do feel awkward, but that's another story. So yeah, of course, when it comes to bullies and whatnot, because everybody has dealt with a bully at some point in their life, you get teased and made fun of, then of course being mixed race does come to, it's like the center of attention. It's the problem all of a sudden. So everyone's experience is different. You can be mixed race and deal with being bullied, etc., although it probably had little to do with you being mixed race entirely, but more so a matter of your appearance or your personality combined. And being mixed race was just an added bonus to be joked about. Everyone wants to feel included, and no one likes to feel left out and or isolated. So that's the part that I think is really hard for people here that are mixed race, is that they want to be a part of the conversation where they can act like, oh, like, wow, like, look at foreigners doing this, whereas instead they spend their whole lives having to be a part of that, although they can't relate to it. You've spent more time speaking Japanese and studying, reading, and writing Japanese, all for your own people to see you as an outsider. And the biggest thing that I think of is, I have people every single day that think that I'm half Japanese, that think that I'm mixed, they think that I look like I'm half Japanese and half black or whatever. And with that said, people will still talk to me in English, even if I speak to them in Japanese. Now this does personally irritate me. It's a pet peeve of mine, as I've talked about several times. But I can't entirely get mad because, yeah, you guessed right, I am an American and I am a native English speaker, and my English ability is higher than my Japanese. But imagine if I were biracial, as I also mentioned, back then too. If you are someone who was actually mixed race and you were born and raised in Japan though, that's gotta be a pain in the butt to constantly have to tell people, don't speak to me in English, I'm Japanese, I don't know English, I'm not mixed, or, I'm not mixed, but you know what I mean. To have to explain that, and you shouldn't even have to say that you're mixed. The fact that you want them to talk the fact that you want them to talk to you in Japanese, it should kind of just be standard to do. You shouldn't have to ask for, whatever language. They should speak to you in Japanese from the start. As I've mentioned before in my other videos on racism and whatnot, you have to deal with people ignoring you, pretending not to hear you, not talking to you because they think you won't understand. These are everyday problems that people that are mixed have to deal with. Society doesn't really hate them. They pretty much love them. Everybody will tell you, oh, I want to be you. I wish I had your eyes. I want your skin. I want your hair. I want your whatever. Because, you have the best of both worlds to them. But when it comes to everyday stuff, in your mind, you always feel like an outsider. You don't quite exactly fit in because you're not really Japanese enough to, be a part of the crowd. And while you can pass for being the foreigner in most circumstances, you've been taught, to see foreigners as being different and, oh, wow, look, foreigners do this. We don't do that. Wow, that's cool, whatever. You want to be a part of the Japanese conversation, oohing and ahhing and laughing at what foreigners do, when instead you get treated like a foreigner from people talking to and about you and thinking that you can't understand, to people not speaking to you because they think you don't understand Japanese when you do. And it's just like a whole long list of little pet peeves basically that annoys people and makes them want to leave. Of course, there are people, like I said, that deal with bullying because of their race. So for example, growing up and going to school, you might have dealt with, if you have dark skin, people might avoid you because they think that you look scary or whatever. Just because you're half black, half Japanese does not mean that you're going to be light skinned. You can most certainly be a lot darker than I am. In fact, most of the half Japanese, half black people that I see here have darker skin than I do, and they have more, African features, so to speak. So they're viewed more as a black person, and for that reason, their experience in Japan is different from someone who is half Japanese, half white, whereas they're seen as looking like an anime character or whatever. And same thing goes for them. The people that I have met here that have been half white, half Japanese, they generally look more like they're Chinese or Korean or whatever, or if they do appear to legitimately be half of both, it's the same problem. It all comes down to the fact that they feel like an outsider because they can't really be a part of the conversation that Japanese people have about foreigners in the foreign world because they're constantly being referred to as half. Like people don't call them Japanese. They're considered as half, which doesn't sound insulting. It might sound like a compliment and cute as an adult, but as a child, a young adult, and when you grow up constantly hearing that, it gets to be a little bit annoying because you can't really just be a solid race. You're just part Japanese. And on top of that, a lot of people, of course, just want to use you. They're like, oh, like you're half, please teach me English. So you deal with the same crap that foreigners do in a nutshell. You're treated like a foreigner despite not being a foreigner. And while it does come with the perks of people, admiring and looking up to half people, you also deal with the fact that people are insulting towards you as well because they say demeaning stuff, etc., because they think that you're a foreigner. So you might overhear people saying negative crap about you, thinking that you can't understand. You'll have people that will avoid sitting next to you, so you'll deal with the ghost seating despite the fact that you are indeed Japanese. So there's so many little things, but basically what I've observed is half Japanese people aren't really treated bad as a whole, but they can be, especially if they happen to have darker features and look more African, specifically for those that are half black and half Japanese. But that's a very rare thing. There's less half black, half Japanese people than there are those that are half white and half Asian here. Also keep in mind that, again, people think that, they have the easiest prize. No, I have a friend here who is half German and half Japanese that lives in, not Tokyo, Yokohama. And her experience here was actually pretty bad. And the reason being is she grew up with people thinking that she was Chinese. She appeared to be Chinese, despite the fact that she was not only not Chinese at all, but she was actually half white, half Asian, which is what most people would love to be here. So again, everyone has their own preference. Everyone's experience with school is going to be totally different, especially if you grew up in the countryside. You'll probably have not so good of an experience because they're less used to seeing foreigners, etc. So you might stand out more, they might joke about you more, etc. if you're mixed race. Whereas in a busy area like Tokyo or Osaka, etc., Kyoto, they're used to seeing foreigners more. So while of course you're probably, still get a lot of attention, you'll still be popular, like going to school, etc., you will also, not deal so much. You will still deal with, people that'll bully you and be mean to you, but not nearly as much as if you grew up in the countryside. And depending on where you are, just because you're in the countryside doesn't mean that people are ignorant. You have people that'll like you even more because, wow, I've never seen, a mixed foreigner at my school before. So it varies. It depends on where you're at and who the people are. I'll also throw in my 2 cents, which I know I shouldn't do. I'm gonna make people mad. But for the people that, like, you know, got upset over the whole Ariana, what's her name, Miyamoto, whatever her name was, the chick that ran for, she won what was it, Miss Japan or whatever, and was in the Miss Universe contest. A lot of people were upset over that, and same thing goes for Naomi Osaka and things like that. But it's like, black people do the same thing in America. So if you're mixed race in America and you are close, you know, to the black community or know anything about it, you get two different kinds of people. You have a lot of people that feel like it's unfair for mixed race black people to compete in, you know, black stuff and to even attend, you know, be able to attend like black schools, etc., and be able to, you know, use those type of whatever, use their race to their advantage, basically, to join stuff. They feel like it's unfair. There's complaints about mixed people even in the natural hair community, etc., but everybody has pretty much got on Japan like, oh, Japan doesn't recognize you as Japanese unless you're winning for them and bringing them in money. It's like, well, we could say the same thing about at least black people in America. It kind of goes both ways. Just like how not everybody in America is against the idea of mixed people competing in things, you know, using their race to allow them to compete and saying, oh, well, I'm half black, so I can compete, you know, with black people for this, and I can choose to identify as black. That upsets some people, but not every black person feels that way. Well, same thing goes for Japan. I would not say that most Japanese people, you know, see people that are mixed as not being Japanese. They will view you as being both, which is why they use the word half. Now, I won't lie though, it does become hurtful being constantly referred to as half, and not just Japanese, just as it would in America. While some mixed people, you know, totally embrace being mixed and they prefer to be, you know, seen as mixed, a lot of mixed people generally cling to one side. They relate more to being black or they relate more to being white. And as many people will tell you, as a mixed person, you constantly feel like you are never enough for either side. You're not black enough to be black. You're not white enough to be white. I am not mixed race, but again, I grew up experiencing like I was. I've had people you know, basically accuse my mother of cheating on my dad, etc., saying like, oh, like your mom lied to you, like you've got to be mixed, you have to be whatever. So I most certainly know what that's like. Excuse that screeching noise. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, no country is perfect. Everybody doesn't all think any particular way. And once again, just as it is for mixed foreigners, if you are mixed in Japan, unless you happen to look more Asian, more than likely people aren't going to see you as being mixed. They will just see you as whatever you are passing as. So if you look more Asian, they'll probably think, oh, you must be Chinese or Korean or whatever if you look a little bit different from the average Japanese person. If you are mixed race and you look more white, you would be seen as a white person, not half Japanese. And same thing goes if you're mixed and you look more black. You would be seen as a black person and not Japanese. And because of this, people will generally make ignorant statements towards you. For example, people message me all the time, and when they see that my profile is written in Japanese, they'll say, oh, like, you must be half. Like, you speak really good, your Japanese is really good. Like, your parents must have taught you whatever. And I'm like, wait, hold on. If I'm living in Japan and you thought I was half, shouldn't I know Japanese? It would be my first language, would it not? People seem to be very ignorant of that. They assume that if you're biracial in Japan, that your first language is English or some other country, and then second comes Japanese, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, especially when you consider the fact that most mixed people here have a Japanese mother and a, you know, foreign father. And normally how it works in Japan is very traditional. Your mother is a stay-at-home mom who raises you, takes care of you pretty much your entire life, does all your laundry, your chores, teaches you how to read and write before you go to school, helps you with your homework, etc. So if anything, she has a larger impact on your language ability than your father would. This is also why people that are mixed in Japan generally still have somewhat of an accent when they speak in both languages, because most people have it where the father only talks to their child in English and the mom only talks to their child in Japanese, and they go to whatever kind of school system they end up going to. So a lot of people, you know, have very different experiences based off of whether they went to an international school or a regular public school, if they spent time in America or whatever country and time in Japan. That all has a huge impact on what your experience is like as a mixed person here. But in general, most people really love and admire mixed people. They're not really treated badly per se, but they never get the experience as though they're really Japanese, because their own people, their own Japanese people, that side of them, will always view them as being a foreigner because they look foreign. And when they do Japanese stuff, they're like, oh, you did a good job for a half, and that's really insulting. So I guess that's it for this video. I can go on forever talking about this topic. once again, long story short, the reason why most mixed people don't really like Japan so much is because they always feel like an outcast. They feel like they're not good enough to be Japanese, and they prefer to have an experience as a foreigner, so to speak, where people aren't, basically judging them so much and saying ignorant crap to them, like complimenting them on basic skills like chopsticks and the usage of Japanese and their ability to read, etc. It gets really annoying having to tell people that you're Japanese and that Japanese is okay, and the whole thing just becomes very aggravating. They feel Japanese, they were born and raised here in Japan, they are Japanese, but they're always treated as exclusively just being that foreign side. So even if they tell people that they are half, people are like, oh, you're half? Like, oh, like that's so cool, whatever. But then they continue to treat them like a foreigner, which becomes very annoying. So again, when you're in a country where everyone's the same and being the same is encouraged, it's really, really hard and difficult for a lot of people here. So that's that. Again, I'm not, downplaying people's experiences. Everyone has a different experience. Yes, people most certainly do get bullied here for being mixed, but I do find for the most part, especially as an adult, more so than anything, as an adult and or a college or high school student, people really admire and love foreigners. They envy them. They, get more dates, they get more attention, they get more opportunities to model, act, etc. because they're viewed as more attractive. People envy them and want to look like them. As a child, as a little kid, you might, feel like you're left out. You might not get as much attention because you're the weird one. You look different. You're like an alien or whatever to the other kids. But that's not everyone's case either. Everyone's story is totally different. Again, if you're half Japanese in Japan, their experience is mostly the same as a foreigner. So it's the same as a foreign exchange student's experience here. The difference is that they actually have knowledge and culture and language ability in Japanese at a native level more than likely because they were born and raised here in Japan, unlike a foreigner. So that's gotta kill you on the inside. Again, I get irritated with people, treating me like a tourist here, and I've been living here for a while. I literally see the same people over and over again at the convenience store, and they constantly want to use English with me. I go to the same restaurants, they constantly offer me English menus, and it's like, it gets really annoying. I can't imagine what that must feel like if you were born and raised here and you're constantly having to tell people, I'm Japanese, please stop. So that's that. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, found this information helpful, useful, if you have more to add to it, because again, I can go on forever about this. I didn't say everything that I wanted to. There's so much more to talk about. Please leave a comment down below or feel free to email me, ask a question, add something else to this video. Other than that, I would appreciate it if you would like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and I have a Snapchat as well. If you haven't already watched part number 1, I highly recommend that you watch part 1, in which I talk about what it's like as a foreigner in Japan who is mixed race, so someone that's black and white that is not Japanese. This video is more so to inform foreigners like what it's like for people here who are half Japanese and half white, or who are Japanese and half black, etc. So that's that. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.